Hello and welcome, my name's Ryan, I'm also known as RM2K Dev. Welcome back to the Unity 5 RPG tutorial. In this video, we're going to be doing our screen fading system. Now this is going to be a very generic screen fader that you can apply to pretty much any situation where you want the screen to fade out and then back in. The screen fader that we're about to create will work across scenes. However, because of the way that I've structured the warping between maps in this tutorial, we're only going to be dealing with screen fading on the map. We'll be using coroutines for this. So take a look on the Unity, I can't even remember the name of it now. The Unity website, there's what is it called? The help desk. The help desk, I'll leave a link in the description. I've lost this video. I've lost you guys already. I apologize. Anyway, I'll leave a link in the description, but take a look at basically the help file, which will explain a little bit more about how coroutines work and what they're doing in the background. Now, it's quite simple to do this, but it is a little bit complicated in the sense that there's lots of steps that we need to follow. So the first thing I'm going to do is create an empty in my hierarchy. I'm going to call this empty HUD. HUD stands for heads up display, and I'm going to position it central, so 0, 0, 0. Under this HUD, I'm going to create a UI image. There it is. And that's going to create a canvas and an image underneath it. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to delete that HUD that we just created, and I'm going to rename the canvas to be HUD, because we'll use the canvas for other stuff as well. There we go. Easy as that. So now the image, we're going to rename this to be screen fader. There it is. And I'm going to tag it. I'm going to add a tag, and I'm going to call this fader. There we go. So we'll be using find get object by tag. So now we've got the tag created. We can change that to be fader. Now we need to create some animations. Now these animations are going to be the fade in and fade out. First of all, let's have a look at this color and find out where it is. There it is in the middle of the screen. So if you look at your HUD, there it is. Just make sure that it's all positioned central, like that. Position 0, 0, 0 for the screen fader. Then click on this anchor stuff in the top left of the rect transform window. Hold down the Shift and the Alt key. That's going to set the pivot point and the position. And then click the most bottom right one. It's going to be stretch, horizontal, and vertical. So now this image is going to cover the entire screen. It doesn't matter what resolution your screen is, this will cover it. So if I set this to free aspect even, this image will cover it. So this works for all aspect ratios, all screen sizes, everything. Go ahead and change the color to black, since that's the fading color we'll be using. And we'll be creating an animation that basically fades in the alpha transparency of this image. So I'm going to leave this at alpha 255. I'm going to go to the window tab and select animation. And then I'm going to click this little drop down here and select create new clip. Now in our animations folder, I'm going to create a folder, call this screen fader. I'm going to call this one fade in. So this is going to be from black to clear. We're going to create another one. And again, animations folder, screen fader, and I'm going to call this fade out. That's going to be from clear to black. So now we're just going to go back to the fade in clip, select add property, select image, and then click the little plus icon next to color. What we'll do from here is expand that out using the little arrow, and we'll come down to this A. So from fading in, we need to go from black. So the first one is going to start at 1. Then as we transition over to the other side, we're going to change that from 1 to 0. There we go. So what will happen is if you look at the game view, let me move this animation window out of the way, and we play this animation, you'll see the screen fades in, nice and smooth from 1 to 0. The next thing we need to do is go to fade out, do the same thing, select add property, image, color. Then under alpha transparency, we need to change that so that the first frame is 0 and the final frame is 1. There we go. Oh, I think I've done that on the first frame. First frame is 0, final frame is 1. So now if I play this animation, you'll see the screen fades out to black. Now, obviously these animations are looping. We don't want that to happen. So we can close the animation window now and navigate in our project Explorer. Just go down to animations, screen fader, select the fade in, uncheck this loop time box. That's going to turn off the looping animation, and select fade out, uncheck that as well. and then double click on screen fader. Now this is the animation controller. This is the state machine that Unity's created for us to basically do all the logic that we need to control our fades. So I'm going to create a transition from fade in to fade out, and I'm going to create a transition from fade out to fade in. Then select parameters in the top left, click plus, and create a trigger. I'm going to create two triggers actually. Create two triggers. One of these triggers is going to be called fade in. The other trigger is going to be called fade out. Now select the transition from fade in to fade out. Add the condition that fade in has been triggered, and then select the transition from fade out to fade in and add the condition that fade out has been triggered. So basically, when you trigger fade in, we can transition from the state of fading in to fading out. And when you trigger fade out, we can transition from the state of fading out to fading in. I hope that all makes sense. And I'll just double check that this is all good. The other thing we need to do is unselect the has exit time and then just expand settings and transition duration, set that to 0. Do the same thing for the other transition as well. So set both of those, uncheck exit time, transition duration is 0. So now what we've got is, if we run the game, we should first of all fade in. That fade in animation will play by default since that's the first and default state. If we check fade in, you'll see that we fade out. And if we check fade out, you'll see that we fade in. So I'll just demonstrate that that works. So if I check fade out, you see that we fade out, just like that. Every time that checks. And if I check fade in, you'll see that we fade in. Oh, we're fading out and then in. Let's have a look what's going on here. Condition fade in takes us to fade out, and fade out takes us to fade in. That should be right. Okay, I'm back. Apologies for that. It looks like my Unity editor was just having a bug. I'm not sure what happened there, but if you have a look now, if I check fade in, you'll see that we fade in, and if I check fade out, it fades back in. So that's how the state machine is working. So all we need to do now is just make sure that works. Fade out. Yep, that's all good. So now we can go to creating our script. The script for this is fairly straightforward, but like I said, we will be using coroutines and enumerators. So have a look at the documentation to see exactly how those work, but I will try to give a brief example. So select your scripts folder, create new C# script. I'm going to call this screen fader. And then I'm going to attach this to the screen fader HUD object, just simply by dragging that onto the inspector with the object selected. Now open that up in Mono Develop, which is just going to take a second to load. There we go. All right, so we've got this script. Basically, all we need to do is first of all get a reference to the animation controller, the animator. So I'm going to say animator. I'm going to call this anim. Then we also need a bool value. So bool is fading. I'm going to set this to false by default. And then in our start method, we can go ahead and get our component for anim. So I'm going to say anim equals get component. It's going to be of type animator. So animator, there it is. So first of all, we get a reference to that component of the animator type, which is attached to the same object that this script is attached to. Then we can go ahead and create some of these methods that we need. I don't think we'll be using the update method, so I'm just going to delete that. Just delete that by just selecting delete. There we go. So all we need to do, the first function we'll create is void animation complete. And what will happen is when the animation finishes, we'll set is fading back to false. So is fading equals false. Okay, now we'll be using this is fading variable to determine how long we need to yield for. Yielding is a concept of basically stopping the execution of this script until a certain condition has been met. So I'm going to create two functions. These are going to be public functions. So first is public IEnumerator, and it's going to be fade to clear. There we go. And I'll create another function, which is public, also an IEnumerator. Let's have a look at the description for IEnumerator as well. IEnumerator supports a simple iteration over non-generic collection. There we go. That doesn't make much sense to me either, but have a look at the documentation, because basically all we're doing, an IEnumerator function, a function that returns an enumerator, it's basically an interface, allows us to call the yield command and pause execution of the function. It also allows us to execute the function as a coroutine, which we'll do in a second. So I'm going to call this one fade to black. There we go. Now, all we do in these is the first thing, the code for these is pretty much going to be the same, but what we need to do is, first of all, say is fading equals true, because we're going to be fading. Then we need to call our animator, and we need to set the trigger, not target, set trigger. There we go. The trigger we're going to set for fade to clear is going to be fade in, because fading to clear means we're fading from black to clear. So say fade in. There we go. Then we say while is fading, we need to yield. We need to yield to nothing. I'm going to change the way I wrote that. There we go. So I'm just going to say while is fading, we need to yield, and we're going to return nothing, so null. Basically what this means is this function will not return until is fading has been set back to false, because we set it to true. So while true means infinitely run this, and it's going to run yield return null. So it's going to sit there returning nothing, saying, hang on a minute, you can't progress until this yield stops running. When the yield stops running, and that means that the is fading variable has been set to false, the script will finish and it will return, which means as a coroutine, we can take advantage of this. We can yield to this function because it won't return until it's finished doing what it needs to do, which is yielding to nothing. I hope that made sense. If it didn't, have a look at how coroutines and yielding work on the documentation. So for fade to black, we're going to do the same thing, except this time we're going to say fade out, because we're fading from clear to black. Now save your script. The next thing we need to do is go back to the animations folder, back to the screen fader, and then click on these animations and just select window animation. Sorry, that doesn't work. You need to click on screen fader. There we go. So now the fade in and fade out animations. These are both attached to an object that has a script on it, and this script has a function on it called animation complete. Now when the animation is over, so basically after all these frames of animation have completed, we've reached this end frame here, we want to call that animation complete function, which changes the is fading variable from true to false, which basically completes the condition for the yield statement to finish running and allows us to finally exit the function and return to normal operation. So select your fade in first, go to the last frame, which for me is going to be 1.00. Right click on this top bar and select add animation event. Now the add animation event allows us to call a function of code from within our animation. Now at the very bottom of the animation, you'll see the animation complete function. Select that and close. What you'll see now is that when this animation finishes running, the last frame, it calls that function animation complete, which sets is fading to false, allowing the function to finish its execution, which means that anything that yielded to that function will wait and finally complete successfully. So we can basically hook into this so that we don't execute anything else until the animation has finished. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the fade out animation. So finally on the last frame, just right click, add animation event, scroll to the bottom and select animation complete. Once that's done, save your project, close the animator. I'm going to undo the play, save my project. Oops, I was doing that in play mode. Let me just make sure that that's all still, yes it is, good. All good, just had to make sure. So we have our screen fader right now. It doesn't matter what we have the alpha set to, so I'm just going to turn it all the way down so we can see our game still. We've created our animation, our animations for fading in and fading out. We've also tied those to the events of our screen fader script. The only thing left to do now is to complete using that, and we're going to be using it in our warp event. So open up the warp script, and I'll show you exactly how we can make use of those enumerators. So under warp, here it is. You'll see we have this on trigger enter 2D section where we say an object is collided, and then we update those positions, those transforms. What we need to do now is hook into the screen fader, and we do that simply by making a reference to the screen fader. So what I'm going to do at the very top of this function is just say screen fader. I'm going to call this SF equals game object dot find game object with tag. There it is. The tag is going to be fader, because if you remember correctly, we have tagged this object with the tag of fader. There it is. So we'll be able to find the game object that has this tag. Then what we need to do is get the component of screen fader from this object. So we say dot get component screen fader. There it is. Just like we do in any awake function. So once the player enters the trigger, we get the screen fader from the hierarchy. Then we can use that screen fader. We can actually yield to those functions that it has, these fade to clear and fade to black. By yielding to these functions, it means, hang on a minute, don't make any more execution. Don't go to the next line of code until this function is finished running. Now this function won't finish running until isFading gets set from true to false. That's why we've got this yield statement in here. And the fact that it is itself a enumerator, or returns the fact that it returns an interface of enumerator means that we can yield to it. So what we need to do now is say yield return start coroutine. So this is going to call a coroutine. I think this basically sets up another thread and runs it on another thread. I'm not 100% on that, don't quote me. sf.fade to black. So what happens is we say fade the screen to black and don't move on to the next line of code until this has finished. When this is finished, we can say the same code that we had before, move our player to the new position as it's written here. And then finally we can say yield return start coroutine sf.fade to clear. Now what will happen if we save this, hopefully everything is good, go to our game, select run, we might have a couple errors that we need to fix. Let's have a look. Of course, we can't use a yield statement in a function that's not an enumerator, so change the void on trigger enter 2D to enumerator on trigger enter 2D. It will still work fine, it just means that we can use yield statements within this function. Save, and all the errors are successfully removed. We can play our game. And hopefully we fade in. When we hit this trigger at the bottom here, we should be able to fade out. Oh, no, what are we missing? We have an error, just got to figure out what these errors are quickly. SF didn't return an instance of, fade to black, didn't return it. Screen fader, find game object with tag fader. Screen fader is tagged. Yes, it is. Oh, of course, I didn't add the script to the object. What an idiot. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so last thing you need to do is add the screen fader script to your screen fader object. Make sure that that's in your inspector and then run the game. And hopefully, if all is well, nothing happens. All right, let me figure out what's going on. Okay, I figured out what's going on. The conditions that I set on these triggers to basically transition from fade in to fade out are the wrong way around. To go from fade in to fade out, the condition needs to be fade out. To go from fade out to fade in, the condition needs to be fade in. Now hopefully, third time's the charm. If we run the game this time and head down to that door, the screen should fade out, the character will move position, and the screen will fade in. There we go. We still have full control over the player, except this time the screen will fade out, the screen will fade in, and we've been moved to the new position. So what's happening here is the screen fades out. Let's have a look at this code again just to make sure that we understand everything. The screen fader itself has two functions, fade to clear and fade to black. Now, when you make a call to these fade to clear or fade to black functions as a coroutine, we're able to use the yield statement. So what happens is it sets the variable is fading to true, starts the animation fade in using the trigger fade in. So if I tick this, you'll see it should fade. There we go. Fades like that. There we go. And then when you tick fade in, it goes back. Fade out goes like that. So as you can see, when we call fade to black, it sets fade out as true. So if we tick that, the screen fades out to black. And then when we fade to clear, we set trigger fade in and it goes back to clear. So what happens is we run the animation, then we say, basically loop this chunk of code forever until isFading returns from being true and gets set to false, which happens at the end of the animation because we make a call to this animation complete function. So it sits here doing this yield return null forever, never finishing this function until the animation completes. When the animation completes, isFading is set to false. This while statement is no longer true, and it exits this function. Now, if we were yielding to that function, which we are doing in our warp code, you'll see that we yield to that function. It basically means you cannot continue running code until this is finished. So when this is finished, we move to the next line of code, which moves our player's position. Then when that's done, it moves on and it waits until fade to clear is completed, and then it exits this function here. So we can demonstrate how this works by using some debugs. So debug.log. And in here, I'm going to say pre-fade out. Pre-fade out. There we go. Then I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to say update player pos, and then finally at the end, I'm going to say pre-fade in, update player pos, and then I'm going to say fade in. There we go. Fade in complete. Now if we, God, I wish I could spell complete. There we go. Now if I save and run this code again, and we'll have a look at the debug this time. I'll clear the debug. There we go. Now as we exit this, what we should see happen is, first of all, it'll say pre-fade out, then it will start fading. When the fading is completed, it will say update player position, then it will start fading again, this time fading in, and then when that finishes, it will say fading complete. What I'm showing you guys here is that the yield statement returning to a coroutine, which is yielding to something itself, will halt the execution of any event that you can think of. Anything you want to do. If you want to do an animation like this or wait for an animation to complete, you can yield to that animation until it's completed. So watch this console window, and I'm going to walk out the door. There we go. Pre-fade out, update player position, fade in complete. I'll do that again. First of all, it will fade out, then it will update the position, then it fades in. So we can use this to basically trigger events in any order that we want them to happen. We can use this to stop our player from being able to move. We can use this from, an NPC who's having a chat dialogue with us. We can basically use this to control the flow of logic within our game. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like. Any comments, questions, and feedback in the section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Oh, and also don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and my gaming YouTube channel, which is RM2KDevNet Games, all one word. Thank you guys for watching. Bye for now.